Christian celebrities from all walks of life, from Rhett and Link to Amy Grant to the best-selling author Joshua Harris, and even OG Christian hip-hop artist The Fanatic from the Cross Movement, have all gone through the process of deconstructing their faith, and many have completely deconverted from Christianity. And through my experience, I've never seen anyone contextualize deconstruction from this specific paradigm. So in this video, I'm sitting down with my friend Arthur, who's a hidden apologetics gem and holds a master's in philosophy. And we're going to be looking at what may be the magic bullet for anyone who's considering deconversion. And it may shock you.
Ruslan.
One of the things that maybe we're missing from this conversation is, hey, before you deconvert or deconstruct for these reasons, right? White supremacy, bigotry, theopolitical gospels, as my buddy Kirk Kennedy would say, before you deconvert for these reasons, go and examine these churches, the Egyptian Coptic Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Ethiopian Church, right? That are not of the West, and look at what they believe about the very things you have issues with: the divinity of Jesus, the Trinity, a Christian biblical sex ethic. I mean, I can go down the list, and all of these different churches believe the core essentials of the Christian faith.
Yeah, that's true.
If they all believe the core essentials of the Christian faith in the same way that evangelicals believe in the core essentials of the faith, and their lineage can be directly traced back to people that walked with Jesus or one generation removed from people that walked with Jesus, could that then be the magic bullet to kind of, diffuse some of this, like, I'm looking at the Bible from a very literal Western context?
Yeah, so what I would say is whenever you're questioning anything, it doesn't matter. It's very important for us to think, am I questioning essential things of Christianity? Or am I questioning secondary things of Christianity? Cultural expressions. It's not even like secondary theological issues. But let's just think about the way we do church. Most evangelicals, I've been in church quite a long to tell you essentially how your church service is going to run. Yep. You're going to show up, welcome, someone's going to get up there, there's going to be a couple of worship songs. Pastor, someone's going to get up there, they're going to give you some announcements, some more worship songs, maybe some prayer. Maybe if you're like in a certain setting, you might read one of the creeds, Chalcedonian Creed or something like that, Nicene Creed. Most aren't going to do that. And then you get a sermon, some more worship, you go home. Right? And then if that's been your experience for like 30 years, and you kind of sit back and say, well, no, man, I might be more interested in like a liturgical service, and even if you know what that means, and you look at it, you go into some of these other traditions, some of them are even Protestant traditions. But when you look at the non-Protestant traditions and stuff like that, you realize that it's done very differently. You get a completely different shock to your senses when you walk into an Orthodox church. The incense is going, you're like smelling the stuff. You're like, man, I'm awake. There's lots of chanting. It's all men in front of you, like males. That's sometimes a little shocking to people who like go to church in the Western world. And it's like there's lots of women. And so I would say, what is it that you're questioning? If it's a cultural expression of Christianity, there's Protestants all across the world that have different cultural expressions of their church. You don't even have to be non-Protestant for that. It's just, that's what their culture looks like. Now, I was looking at a mega church from Egypt, okay? Mega church. Like,
by mega church, do you mean like Western mega church or just the sheer size?
The size. It's a mega church. But it's very Western. Right?
Okay.
It looks like a Protestant service. And then I found that it's a Coptic church.
Egyptian Coptic church.
Egyptian Coptic church. And I was like,
wow.
That was not what I would have expected from an Egyptian Coptic church, because it looked like an evangelical church service. So there's room to navigate some of this stuff. So again, if you're kind of thinking, oh man, I'm a Christian, the Republican stuff is pushed too much. It's like, okay, look around the world.
Come on.
Look around the world. Is that the expression? Can you navigate that somehow? Can you be more balanced, let's just say?
Yeah, that's good.
Right? By observing your brothers and sisters, both currently around the world and then historically around the world. You can't say all of church history has been Republican. Right? You can say all of church history has been conservative. I'd say probably way more conservative than the Republicans. Right? Way more conservative. Like, they would shock you with some of the stuff when you read some of the writings. You're like, oh man, these guys are serious about this stuff. And so you're able to navigate that stuff without giving up the whole thing. Maybe what you need to give up is your cultural expression of Christianity. That's not even a secondary issue for me. That's like way down the list. Some of these people have been thinking about these things for some time. So, I mean, the MAGA phenomenon is fairly recent, right? And then now we've kind of seen the climax of that.
Yeah. From my experience, is like you said, people are thinking about it. They're wrestling with it. I think it's more of a philosophical, cultural thing that starts in your head. But I grew up in Armenian apostolic church. You're Armenian. As a refugee, that's all we had. That became the crux and the center of our community. My initial impression of Christianity was a bunch of folks that were darker skinned than me, who served this Jesus that was darker skinned than me, and had a very ethnic connection and a lot of ethnic pride around their Christianity.
Right. Yeah.
We're the first Christian nation.
Right.
And then my second encounter with the gospel was folks from the Black Baptist tradition. So my very first two interactions, before I even knew what a white evangelical was, before I even knew what a non-denominational church was, it was the Armenian Apostolic Church, a bunch of folks that look more like you than me, right? And then it was a bunch of folks that were black. When people were deconstructing and the reasons they were giving was because of cultural, because of white supremacy, because it's the West, because all these different things, I'm sitting here thinking like, well, that was just not my interactions and encounters with Christians. And this is where I really want you to tell us more about this is I think one of the best ways to avoid deconversion and deconstruction is to travel and expose yourself to more Christians.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Right? And to see that. And any Christian friends that I have, black Christian friends that I have that go to Ethiopia or go to Israel, go to Jerusalem, always come back reinvigorated in their faith, right? Because they see how much bigger Christianity is. And I want you to talk about that. And then also church history.
I was born in Etchmiadzin, which is the holy see of the Armenian Apostolic Church.
Okay.
Where the Catholicos is, they have a seminary there. So I even as a young kid, even though I didn't go to church, especially when we moved to the States, but I always saw essentially priests in training. It's all I knew. I didn't know white Christianity. I mean, white Christianity was a foreign thing to me. This isn't the only expression of Christianity in the world.
Yeah.
And so how do I deal with that? Some people, it's like white evangelicalism, and then they meet like a Greek Orthodox guy, and they're like freaked out. Like these, what are these guys doing? Now, why do they dress like that or something like that?
Right.
For me, it was the opposite. It's like when I saw churches where people didn't have all the garb, it wasn't the incense.
It was a culture shock.
Stuff. I was like, this is not Christianity. What is this? It looks silly. My first experience, basically with evangelicals, I went to Harvest Crusade, Greg Laurie, with some friends I made at school, and I remember everybody was worshiping. People were on their knees worshiping and stuff. And I remember standing there and saying, I think they're a cult. And I was like, these people are nuts. What are they doing? Like, why are they on their knees? Like, I was just in shock because I didn't really know what I was going to. It was like, hey, there's this Christian kind of thing going on. I was like, sure. But I'd never experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
And so that was a shock for me. And it's very important for us to know how to navigate that. Church history will give us the framework of how to look at this because it crosses denominational lines. It crosses historical lines. 3rd century versus 15th century versus now. And then cultural lines. So you get Germans and Middle Easterners and North Africans and Americans. Like they all have different expressions. When you see that and you understand that well, I think it kind of calms you down not to overreact against your own experiences.
Do you think that if people had more understanding of church history, that it could anchor them against going down the slippery slope of deconstruction and then oftentimes deconversion?
Absolutely. No question about it in my mind.
Okay. So, because how I think about it is, I've heard, like the Andy Stanleys, and Lee Strobels, Josh McDowell's, and they're like, man, like the resurrection, right? Like we look at the validity of the Bible through the event of the resurrection, and that's the crux. That's like a classical apologetics, if you will, right? But I've never heard anybody describe, and maybe this is a book or some sort of idea, but I've never heard anybody go the other side of like the resurrection. And then it wasn't like hundreds and hundreds of years, and then we got the Bible, and then thousands of years, and then we have the Protestant Reformation, and then now we're here. That there's actually the very people who wrote the Bible, or the epistles, the New Testament epistles, the letters, right, then had successors.
Correct.
And then those successors had the successors. And then those people, right? And so we often just view Christianity as in like Catholic and Protestant. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about like the church history. We know that the Apostle Bart and Jude went to Armenia to plant the church. But then there was Doubting Thomas that went to India. And then they believe Mark, who was close to Peter,
ended up in Egypt.
Egypt, right? Ethiopia.
And they're traveling. I mean, Paul and Peter end up in Rome.
Yeah.
That's pretty far away from, considering ancient
from
world,
Israel,
of ancient world demographics and geography. That's far from home.
Yep.
Right. And so they're traveling on foot, by ship. I mean, Paul speaks about the issues he has, shipwreck and all that stuff. They are risking their lives to take the gospel. I mean, as far as to India, you got people going into China, and disciples of disciples, not necessarily direct disciples, but yeah, you got the Iranian Armenian kind of thing with Thaddeus and Bartholomew, and so these things are cross culture. I mean, these are Jews going to Indians and Egyptians and Armenians and Romans. Like, how cross cultural is that?
Yeah.
That's phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
It's not white supremacist, racist people trying to oppress other people.
Right. This is connected back to churches that are still active today.
Correct.
Right. So like the church in India can trace their lineage back to Thomas. Right. We grew up in the Armenian apostolic tradition, and everyone is, we're the first Christian nation, right? And you always have Ethiopia and Armenia argue over who was the first Christian nation. But we can trace that back all the way to Bartholomew and Jude. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it seems like that Bartholomew and Jude or Thaddeus, they went to Armenia, and they were persecuted, heavily persecuted.
And these are guys, Bartholomew walked with Jesus.
Correct. Direct the disciples of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, eyewitnesses. John says in his letter, we saw him, we touched him, we ate with him, we heard him.
Yeah.
And so these guys go take the gospel there. They're eventually martyred for their faith. And a lot of these guys, wherever they went, it's not like they went and then became rulers and leaders and then just like oppressed everyone else. Most of them died for what they were preaching. It wasn't accepted like that. It wasn't like, whoa, look, salvation is here. People resisted this stuff. But the church was planted. There was an underground church, you could say, in Armenia for about 300 years till Armenia officially became a Christian nation. Right? People were meeting in caves and stuff like that. And then but some of those sites are still there in Armenia. I visited some of them, and it's like really brilliant. Like there's a church called Dadivank in Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. And Dadi was a direct disciple of Thaddeus.
Wow.
And like I remember standing there talking to the priest, 3 years ago now, and I was like, okay, tell me about the history here. And he tells me, and I go, I was like in shock, the fact that standing there, this guy's grave is there. I was like, I'm one person essentially, right? Like one person separated from.
Wow.
Like that's how close it is. And you kind of don't get the emotional kind of kick to your guts till you're like standing in places like that. And you go, man, the history is way beyond what I can even comprehend here.
Yeah. Talk about some of the other places that Christianity spread to, and some of the what we would call early church fathers, right?
Yeah,
like they were friends of the disciples or one generation removed from the disciples.
So you got the Mediterranean setting. You got North Africa being a huge center of Christianity. And eventually ends up becoming like there's two major schools with Antioch and Alexandria, Egypt. So you don't really get Christianity going into Europe like that till pretty late on, till Rome essentially is like crumbling and stuff like that.
Interesting.
You'd say whatever 3rd, 4th century. What would you say the Western Roman Empire?
Yeah.
So most of the centers of the early church, North Africa, Middle East, Mediterranean region, you could say, Greece, Rome, obviously.
Yeah.
And then you get Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. Like it's that region. And so a lot of people don't realize that the people who live in that region are not Anglo-Saxons.
Right.
Predominantly, this is church history for a major period of our ancestors.
Yeah.
And then they produce some of the best thinkers that we've had.
Okay.
So you get Augustine of Hippo, right? Augustine is like, everybody like quotes him.
Yeah.
Protestants love him, Catholics love him. Like, everybody loves
Yeah.
this guy.
And when was Augustine around?
So Augustine's in the 300s.
Okay.
But Augustine's born in modern day Algeria, right? That's not in Europe. That's in Africa. You get the Cappadocian fathers, you know, Basil, the two Gregories, phenomenal church fathers. You get Athanasius, who's from Alexandria.
And Alexandria's in Egypt.
Yeah.
And then they have one of the early creeds or the
So the
councils.
Athanasian Creed, for example, right? Athanasius wrote it. But yeah, you get councils that are taking place in Alexandria. So again, like one of the best written formulations of the Trinity is by Athanasius. Stood up against Constantine when he needed to. Constantine would like waver on his theology and stuff like that, and would appoint like Arians to high places in office. Athanasius, I think, was exiled from the kingdom like 7 times. It ended up going to Ireland in one of his exiles, like taking the gospel there. Like, these are serious men of God who are doing serious work for the gospel. And going into extremely remote place. Again, you got to remember the context of the ancient world.
Yeah.
Even going to a neighboring country is not a very easy thing to do. Antony, who's Egyptian, who's the desert, he started the monastic movement essentially. Like that. This is the setting. You can't talk about this stuff without talking about these people.
What do you think about people who say, "Hey, you guys are creating this whole like kumbaya scenario on this podcast. Everyone is Christian. Everyone loves Jesus." But man, we got some disagreements within the Armenian apostolic on the christening. We talked about that on our last interview. We have disagreements with the Catholic Church, right? How they define grace and first salvation versus second salvation. And I like a lot of these guys. I listen to like Council of Trent. I listen to Pints with Aquinas. A lot of these guys are really brilliant Catholic apologists. But we have some disagreements with them, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I'm not Catholic.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like, there's a reason I'm not Eastern Orthodox. Like, I have Eastern Orthodox friends.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why I'm not Armenian Apostolic. That would be like the closest thing, right? Like the immediate thing for me to be like, okay, I'm going to be. And they're theological. They're serious reasons.
Yep.
But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is kind of having a broader understanding of the history of our family.
Yep.
Look, I don't need to agree with my dad on everything to recognize the fact that he's my dad.
Yeah.
This is my family.
Yep.
I don't need to agree with everything with my brothers.
Yeah.
To say, this is my family. Here's where the origins are. Here's stuff we agree on.
Yep.
We don't question this stuff.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, I got issues with Catholics. I got issues with Armenian Apostolic, Eastern Orthodox. And they have issues with me. There's no issue. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
Yep.
And some of it's really, really serious stuff. I'm not saying let's all agree. Like, if somebody asked me, should I go become Eastern Orthodox or Catholic or something like that, I'd be very hesitant to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because of those issues.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about.
That's
What we're
good.
talking about is people saying, I'm just going to give up Christianity because of what's happened in America in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
That's not a good enough reason when you consider 2,000 years of history.
Yeah.
Arthur from the Apologia Center has put together an introduction to philosophy and apologetics class in order to help Christians develop and establish their worldview. The link for that will be pinned in the comment below as well as in the description. I'll see you over there, all right? Peace.